Every year when the President delivers the State of the Union address to the Congress, or at least most years, I don't believe there was one this year, the President designates a member of the Cabinet to be a designated survivor. And the reason for that is that in the nuclear age, the remote possibility does exist that some adversary might launch an effective attack, a catastrophic attack, on the U.S. Capitol and kill everyone there. So, in order to preserve the presidential line of succession, a member of the Cabinet is chosen as the designated successor to not attend the State of the Union address and go hide out in a secure facility until the crowd disperses at the U.S. Capitol. This person is known, obviously, as the designated survivor. And last fall, ABC television premiered a new show called Designated Survival that is based on that exact scenario. Now, I'm not sure what the current status of Designated Survivor is. It premiered at a time when people were feeling pretty down and hopeless about the state of the country, and although these scenarios are popular themes for movies such as White House Down and Olympus Has Fallen and various others, interest may not have been as high during the 2016 election, because it was a time when a lot of people were feeling that everything's just going to hell anyway, and that maybe it didn't really matter that much because whatever happened was going to be bad. So I didn't watch it at that time, partly for that reason, but I was clicking around on my on-demand service the other day, and I decided to take a look at Designated Survivor. I found it to be a very intriguing series, and in a couple of days I've already watched about 6 episodes, because the scenario that is presented is an interesting one, an intriguing one, to say the least. Kiefer Sutherland is the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, and apparently he is out of favor with the administration. In fact, he's about to be fired. Now, this is an important point, because at the time when the Capitol does come under attack and they all get killed, he is still the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. But he's portrayed as sort of this clueless administrator, sort of a hapless administrator who may not necessarily be a strong leader and not particularly competent in running his department. And the current president at that time, a President Richmond, has decided to get rid of him. But very important point, he's still the Secretary of H.U.D. when it happens. And so the Secretary Kirkman, I believe it is stashed away in this secure facility watching the State of the Union address when the screen goes blank and the U.S. Capitol has been bombed. And now here is where it starts going off the rails, and it goes off the rails in several different ways. First of all, I should add that there is a member of the U.S. House in this series who is also a designated survivor. And that likely does happen for this reason, because the U.S. House, if it's totally decimated, is much harder to reconstitute than the U.S. Senate. In the case of the Senate, all 50 governors could appoint 2 temporary senators pending an election, and so that could happen fairly quickly. The House must be filled by election, and so in this scenario, and probably in the real world, a member of the U.S. House is a designated survivor to represent Congress. Well, the series sort of goes off the rails because in the aftermath of this attack, after the Secret Service comes rushing in to secure Rickman and get him on the way to the White House, they actually open up the door, and within their sight they can see the U.S. Capitol ablaze. That is not realistic at all. That is not likely at all. The designated survivor is nowhere near the U.S. Capitol. They are much further away in a secure facility. So, apparently, HUD Secretary, the HUD Secretary was in a less secure location because they just opened the door and they saw the U.S. Capitol ablaze. So the Secret Service rushes him to the White House. They get him in the car to rush him motorcade to the White House, and on the way there they discover that apparently there are no survivors at the U.S. Capitol. And the Secret Service agent turns to the Secretary and says, "You are now the President of the United States." So he goes to the White House and is sworn in by a federal judge. Apparently all the Supreme Court justices died in the attack as well. So he's sworn into office, and it gets pretty unrealistic here too, because the picture that we see, you know, his future as HUD secretary was about to go away anyway. He was about to be fired, but he arrives at the White House and he's sort of lost. As a matter of fact, when he gets the call that he's going to be the designated survivor, he asks, what's a designated survivor? And that wouldn't happen at all, because they all know damn well what a designated survivor is, and they know what they might be called upon to do. So that's not realistic. But another thing that's not realistic is he gets to the White House and you get this idea that he's sort of being pushed around by the White House staff and the Secret Service and generals and everyone else. And so it takes him a while to get a handle on things. Now, he does start to get a handle on things, but he does seem kind of hapless and confused about whether he should even be there or not. Now, here's something else that is not very realistic, is that right away people start to question whether he should occupy the presidency at all. And that is one of the problems with the series Designated Survivor, is there seems to be this lack of respect for constitutional law and the rule of law. Because in the event of a catastrophic attack on the U.S. Capitol and everybody dying, the designated survivor absolutely is the legal president of the United States. And yet you have people who want to start to challenge that, and one of the reasons they want to start to challenge it is that he was going to be fired, but he hadn't been fired yet. Well, President Rickman does start to sort of get a handle on things, but he is confronted by this rogue general who wants to initiate a series of attacks right away, wants to be a loose cannon, so to speak. Now, is that realistic? Well, I think that a lot of times popular media wants to portray military people and generals as sort of rogues who are wanting to go to war at any time. And actually, these are very educated people with college degrees. Now, it's true that many, if not most of them, went to West Point or the Air Force Academy or the Naval Academy. I believe Marines also go to the Naval Academy. I'm not sure about that, but they are highly educated people. They do know a lot about international affairs, so I don't think it's very likely that you would have one who would be as willing to go rogue as this general was. Rogues are not people normally who rise to the rank of general. Rogues are people like me. As a matter of fact, that might be the title of a good song. Now again, there's a rogue such as I, or something like that. What do you think? That might be something there, because I am a malcontent, a maverick, and a rogue in my political beliefs. Well, a situation that arises, first of all, he wants to be sure who needs to be attacked. And there is pressure to mount an attack right away on the people who are believed to be responsible. But the intelligence services are only able to tell him that they are 75% sure who is responsible. So he's holding back, wanting more information, which is probably the right thing to do. Because if you don't do the right thing and you just go off and attack somebody, then you end up with something like the Second Persian Gulf War, in which it was asserted that Iraq had all of these weapons of mass destruction in their country, and that was proven apparently never to be the case. It was widely believed that they had them, but they got moved to another country in advance of the second U.S. invasion, but I don't think anybody's ever been able to prove that. So he does the right thing by wanting to hold back and determine who the attackers are. But there are attacks against the government, against his legitimacy, and here's one that is particularly irksome to me. The governor of Michigan basically opens war, essentially declares war on the Muslim community there, and sends in state police, and they are stopping and attacking Muslims, and there's a case where a Muslim boy is apparently beaten to death. Now, the problem with President Rickman is he's far too slow to respond to this. Instead of immediate military intervention in the state of Michigan, which is what ought to happen, he starts talking to all these lawyers, and they disagree with each other, and the situation just kind of goes to hell for a while. Eventually, he does decide to federalize the Michigan National Guard, but by this time, the commander of the Michigan National Guard has decided that he's going to answer only to the governor of Michigan. Well, the governor of Michigan is lured to Washington, D.C., and when he arrives, he is immediately placed under arrest for treason, and that's a very likely scenario. But it's kind of unrealistic that he waited so long to act, because in this situation he effectively was the head of the government. There was no Supreme Court, there was no Congress, other than this one and eventually two congressmen who did end up surviving. So it's unrealistic in the fact that the intervention in Michigan wasn't more forceful. Another problem erupts later on when the 50 governors are called to Washington and they're about to appoint a U.S. Senate. And once again, they want to attack his legitimacy. You know, there's this female governor, apparently from Arizona. Maybe she was supposed to be Governor Jan Brewer or someone like Governor Jan Brewer. And she openly questions whether Rickman is to be president or not, and he gets some of the same blowback from the governor of Florida, and they start saying these things. Well, what are you going to do? Arrest us all? Well, in fact, that would have been the thing to do. In a case like this, and you see this in the show, there's sort of this disrespect for the rule of law. The 50 governors want to challenge his legitimacy. Now, under the Constitution and laws as they actually exist, the president would be completely justified in declaring martial law and in arresting all of these 50 governors. But instead, he's kind of hesitant and incompetent and sees the need to convince all these people to go along with him. And I think that is kind of ridiculous. Another unrealistic thing you see about this series is that there is a congressman who mysteriously survived in the U.S. Capitol. As we get further into this, it is determined that a secret bomb shelter was erected in the U.S. Capitol to be a shelter for this particular person. And, you know, this was apparently built with nobody knowing what was going on. A specialized bomb shelter, and that's how this second congressman was able to survive. Not only that, but the device that was planted in the U.S. Capitol, the device that destroyed the U.S. Capitol was actually planted there, and that is not very likely at all. So you see this disrespect for the rule of law, and you see an administration that is very hesitant to act when they should act. I mean, let's face it, in a chaotic situation with everything sort of going to hell, the administration would be able to act decisively in a rogue state like Michigan and would be able to arrest governors for treason. And that forceful way of doing things would be the thing to do, because after all, he is the constitutional and legal president. But in the United States, we seem to have issues with Constitution and laws. I mean, constitutionally, Donald Trump is the president of the United States, and that's not going to be able to be changed. And the only way to change a future outcome like that would be to get rid of the Electoral College, and that involves getting 290 votes in the House, 67 votes in the Senate, and then being ratified by 38 states. That's not going to happen. So that the rule of law is that, you know, the Electoral College is here to stay, and it'll be done away with on the 12th of never. Well, eventually he does convince these governors to go along, but I thought he was much too easy on them. They didn't really have to play ball the way he did, that many of those people could have been arrested and jailed, and I don't think anybody would have been able to stop it. And if I were in that position, that is what I would have done. It's a very interesting drama. It's a very intriguing drama. There are suggestions that maybe he should just step down. Now, the prevailing legal theory, if all of the cabinet is gone, is that undersecretaries and deputy secretaries are then eligible to succeed. But it gets a little murky there. And so that is possible. But still, there's no need to do that, because he was the legal constitutional president of the United States. It would be a messy situation if it got to a situation where deputy and undersecretaries started succeeding to the presidency in a situation like that, because the constitutional legal questions get a bit murky there, although it is the default thing and probably would happen. So what do I think of Designated Survivor? I think it's a tremendously intriguing, interesting television series. They do mess with reality in several ways that I have explained. They do present a person who seems to be an unnecessarily weak leader at first, and I doubt that any cabinet member would be that weak and hapless to start with. And so, although it's an interesting television series, it's pretty far-fetched from reality. Still, there are a lot of theories about what might happen in extreme chaos, and those are worth exploring, because the entire cabinet being eliminated and in getting into this matter of deputy and undersecretaries could be a mess. It's an interesting series, but I wouldn't take it too literally. But if you want a good suspense story, Designated Survivor certainly